Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about Dungeons & Dragons, specifically 5th edition, and using emotional labor in dungeon mastering. Okay? Alright, now, before I dig in, I have a warning. So, essentially, what I'm going to be talking about today, I want to warn about this particular topic, but this is generally specific to all of my DMing advice. Okay? So all of my DMing, my dungeon mastering advice is not for newbie DMs. Absolutely not for newbie DMs. Now the reason I don't really touch giving advice to newbie DMs ever, and the reason why is it is a massively covered segment already. Right? There's absolutely no shortage of incredibly well versed commentators, Dungeons & Dragons commentators, who are giving really sound advice for newbie DMs. I actually think that there is a little bit of a gap, and this is exactly what I'm trying to address. So there's also there's skilled dungeon masters, skilled veteran dungeon masters. Much of my advice is not even for them. I am giving advice for dungeon masters who are in the absolutely deepest end of the dungeon mastering pools. Right, so these are for... So here is people who should be listening to my dungeon mastering advice. If you have played 100 you should check off every single one of these boxes. And if you haven't, you should not follow any of my dungeon mastering advice, because it won't be useful until you reach that point. Okay, so I'm talking to dungeon masters who have dungeon mastered 100 plus games. Okay, I'm talking to dungeon masters who have listened to 100 plus hours of podcasts they've listened to, and that has included actual plays and DM advice. Okay, I am talking to dungeon masters who have consumed at least 100 hours of YouTube commentary on TRPG design, on Dungeons and Dragons design for adventures, your own custom adventures. That has talked about how Dungeons and Dragons impacts politics, how the history of Dungeons & Dragons, and how Dungeons & Dragons has affected American history. Okay? A dungeon master who has read a dozen non-fiction books on designing adventures for Dungeons & Dragons, on the politics of Dungeons & Dragons, how Dungeons & Dragons impacts politics, and on the history of Dungeons & Dragons, and how Dungeons & Dragons impacts American history. Right? So, only dungeon masters that meet that criteria, 100 plus games, 100 plus podcasts, 100 plus hours of podcasts, 100 plus hours of YouTubes, a dozen nonfiction books, and half a dozen, and also half a dozen conventions where you have gone to panels where you have played and run your own games at conventions. Okay, that's the bare minimum. Only people who meet that should be listening to my Dungeon Master advice and then following it. Now, if you're like you don't meet all that, you're welcome to listen to it, right? And then put that into Trello to say, I will do that 5 years from now when I meet all those criteria, right? But I want to make it super clear. I do not give advice for newbie DMs. There's absolutely no shortage of that. In fact, I have a theory that there are more people giving advice to newbie DMs than there are actually newbie DMs. I think it's one of the biggest problems in our hobby, okay? So the reason why I'm giving these warnings is where we're going today, we must tread carefully. Okay, so here's one more. So one, you need to be a dungeon master. So in order to even attempt anything I talk about today, right, you should be a dungeon master who fits the criteria I just described. In addition to this, you should have no significant mental health issues. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is it is a major thing within TRPGs overall, and certainly within the Dungeons & Dragons community. Many people use, I will say some people use Dungeons & Dragons as a form of therapy, which is interesting, right? And then also, I frequently, especially on Twitter, or even on Facebook, I hear people discussing how many players, many game masters, many game designers have significant mental health issues. Okay, if you are struggling with those, absolutely do not attempt what I am talking about today, because you're not in a space to go down this road. Okay, Continue to work through the therapy that you're going, that you're already engaged in. And when you feel that you're stable and you're not dealing with those kind of issues, please consider dealing with what I'm talking about today. With all those caveats done, let's talk about it. All right. Today I'm talking about Dungeons and Dragons and using emotional labor in Dungeon Mastery. So what is emotional labor? Well, first of all, so emotional labor is the process of managing feelings and expressions to fulfill requirements for a job. For a job, okay? Essentially, people who use emotional labor are workers who are expected to regulate their own emotions during interactions with customers, coworkers, and managers. Okay? Some examples of people who use emotional labor are public administrators, flight attendants, nurses, doctors, teachers, librarians, and social workers. Okay? Let's talk about who coined the phrase and came up essentially with this discipline, with this area of study, might be a better way to put it. This all came from a Berkeley professor, specifically a sociologist, by the name of Arlie Hochschild. Right now, Arlie Hochschild essentially explained that manufacturing, all right, was so that our labor, especially in the United States of America, was transforming from manufacturing to service. Okay, and so in the old days, especially in manufacturing, right, you're just putting together some widgets, right? But now with service, you are expected to, your widget is often how someone feels or what they're getting from you that is intangible, right? And that requires emotional labor, right? So essentially, someone who is employing emotional labor, they go into a job and they are expected to control their own emotions, and then by controlling their own emotions, elicit a specific target emotion from the person they're working with, right? So emotional labor is an area of research that has specifically been, cordoned off, defined, and is now being researched and absolutely being executed in the job market across multiple industries. Okay, now I recently began researching emotional labor, and I believe it's absolutely a powerful tool that we should be bringing over to Dungeon Mastery. And the reason why is I was recently remembering, I'm very blessed. I'm in multiple gaming groups. One of my gaming groups is run by a young game master. This young game master came off of a shift at kind of a service job, right? Kind of like a clerk or a teller, right? And this young game master had just come off of an 8-hour shift, right? And so literally at the beginning of the game, the dungeon master went like, and smacked himself, and I was like, whoa, and he goes, all right, I'm ready, and I was like, what is he doing, and I realized, every good game master realizes that the energy of a game comes from them. If they're high energy, the players will be high energy, right? If the game master is low energy and is not ready to be there, the players are not going to have a good time. So as game masters, we've always understood that the energy for the table comes from us, right? Well, emotional labor is that next step. And again, this is the deepest end of the DMing pool, right? Only people who have absolutely mastered DMing from a game craft perspective should be considering this, right? All right, but so here's what you would do in order to employ emotional labor at your table. Now I'm going to talk about how we're going to employ emotional labor, and then I'm going to talk about why we should consider employing emotional labor. Okay? So here's how we employ emotional labor. All right, so essentially, basically, Arlie Hochschild explained that there are emotion regulation strategies. They come in 3 forms. They come in the cognitive form, they come in the bodily form, and they come in the expressive form. Okay, let's talk about the cognitive form. This is changing image, ideas, or thoughts in hopes of changing feelings associated with them. So let's say you're going into a game, right? And you're not happy. Let's say you're down, right? As a game master, as a dungeon master, right? What you would then do is you would think of your family picture, especially if your family brings up good. Let's say you have a wonderful relationship with your family. You have a family picture. right? You think of the family picture, and then the happiness that brings you up and gets you happy for the game. Okay, that would be a cognitive strategy to control your own emotions with the target of controlling the emotions of your players. Okay, all right, keeping them happy and excited and through the game, right? Because that's what we want. We don't want people down and, you know, pensive. Like, that's not the vibe we're looking for, right? What about bodily, right? This is where you change the physical symptoms in order to create a desired emotion. A good one is deep breaths to reduce anger, okay? Perfect example, right? You spend 3 days creating a custom dragon, right? This new custom dragon, you know, comes from 2 different elements and is you know, the combination of 2 different types of magic or 2 different types of elements. You have completely kitted out, you know, all these new attacks for this new dragon, and it's unique, it's dangerous, right? And it gets taken out in round 2 by some super weird roll and some strange old magic item that you forgot one of the PCs had. Right now you're angry, right? Rather than go, you know, baring your teeth, you go, "That was great, Sally. Good job." Right? You take a deep breath to reduce your anger. Okay? All right. Next is expressiveness, right? So you want to change your expressive gestures to change the... so this is where you change expressive gestures to change your feelings, right? So you literally smile to be happy. You put a smile on your face. When you start your game, even though you don't have a smile on your heart, you put a smile on your face, right? By the way, I'll bet you right now, there's some people using emotional labor at Disneyland, right? And that's what we want, man. This is time, you know, this is go time. This is like precious special time, right? But actually, I'm getting into the why. Okay, so now I just explained to you how you're going to employ emotional labor as a dungeon master, right? Now, one of the things that is useful here is, you know, I was unaware of emotional labor before I began my research on the topic. And, you know, now I know what it is. I'm aware of the strategies, and I can begin to employ them. Now, with anything you start, right, this is just like going to the gym. Don't throw in 25 emotional labor, regulation strategies into your first game. Try one, right? Ramp into this. But let's talk about why. Why should we use emotional labor in a dungeon mastering game, right? Why should we attempt to control our own emotions and attempt to control the emotions of our players? Why should we do that? Let's talk about it. 2 reasons. High-value players, high-value time. Okay? All right. What's a high-value player? All right. Well, I'm going to talk about it from 2 perspectives. All right. I have a high-value player. I have multiple groups. In one of my groups, actually, I have multiple high-value players. But in this one group, I have one specific high-value player. Okay. So what makes this one player any more valuable than another? Well, let me explain. Okay. All right. This player I work in technology, right? I love my job. It's great. And then I have other people in my group who work in technology. I have people who work in retail jobs. I have people who work in entertainment, right? All of our jobs are pretty secondary. The world isn't going to break if one of us doesn't do our job well. But that's not the case with one of my players. I have a crazy smart player who goes into work every day, and their decisions affect the lives of entire families, right? If they don't get things right, people can seriously be harmed, or if they do things right, their actions can echo joy into the lives of other human beings for weeks or months or years. This is a person who is way smarter than me, right? And whose work in any given week could be more important than all the work I'm doing in an entire year. This is a high-value player. I learn from this player just by having this player at my table, right? This is a high-value player, right? Because what they do echoes into the world, right? When this person comes in, if I run a crap game, I know that they could be upset, right? And that could echo into the lives of other people, right? The other thing is I know that what they do takes an incredible emotional, mental, and I even suspect a spiritual burden on this person, right? So if I run a great game, right, I can pay this person back the tiniest amount for helping our society in the way that they do. That's really special, right? That's a high-value player. from one aspect. There's another aspect, okay? What's another high-value player? I have multiple players who do these other things. Players who take actions to set up other players' actions. Players who joyfully play a cleric, okay? Who are not doing it because they were asked. I have a player, okay, who, I have multiple gaming groups. In one of my gaming groups, this happened once, okay? One of the players said, "Oh, man, did you see that new source book that came out?" And the other player said, "Yeah, I did." And they're like, "Well, you know, it's your character. Are you going to get it?" Right? You know, it's all options for your player character, your character's class. And the person said, "I'm not, you know, I saw it, man. I even looked at it at, you know, at at Barnes and Noble, and it, you know, I just can't. It's awesome, but I can't afford it." Right? And the other player was like, "Oh yeah, I get that, you know." But at the next game, right, that player brought that book and said, "Hey, here's this book," right, and gave it to the other player at the table, right. And the person was like, "Wasn't this expensive?" And the person said, "Well, you know, we were getting ready for Christmas. We did a purchase over $100, so we got a major discount. So it really didn't cost much, you know." And you know, they were just being nice, you know. But the reality is, these people have extremely different levels of income. So for this one person, it was like buying a candy bar or maybe a hoagie. For this other person, it would have been a big deal. It would have been like buying dinner for 6 people, you know, comparatively, right? For one, the purchase of that book didn't mean much. For the other, it meant a lot, right? That is a high-value player, right? A player saying, "I'm not just worried about the character sheet in front of me. I'm worried about the player next to me, in the seat next to me," right? That is a high-value player, right? So, and then also, players who are kind and generous and wonderful in character and out, right? Have you ever had a character who is like, "Oh, I know that seemed like a real jerk move that my character just did, but that's my character, that's not me," right? That's not a high value player. And people who don't play character jerks you know, to choose not to do that are high value players, right? You know, so people who aren't the cleric pusher, the person who's going, "Hey, Sarah, you got to play the cleric because we don't have one," right? That's not a high-value player. The person who plays the cleric joyfully so that they can help the party. That's a high-value player. High-value players is the first. If you have high-value, now, maybe you don't have high-value players. If you don't use emotional labor, right? Like, do not bother. Like, you're just playing a game, right? There are times where I think Dungeons & Dragons is elevated above a game. It is a human experience that we are sharing that is as beautiful as, you know, as a ballet is. It's as beautiful as the highest areas of art, right? It's special, right? All right, so high-value time, okay? Physical table games are high-value time, right? Not streaming. So if I am inviting you into my home and I have cleared the kitchen table, right? And I have taken time to put all those, you know, bring all my miniatures into the room, and I have a map on the table, right? And I have cut fruit, right? That is high value time. That's my time, and we are breaking bread together. We are sitting together, right? This person can ask me to move the next day, right? Or they can say, "My cat died," right? And I can come over and bring coffee from Wawa. That's a friend. That's high value time. Streaming games do not have high value time. I would not bother using emotional labor in any streaming game. And the reason why is often, now, there's a super tiny portion, in my opinion, of people who must absolutely, that's a whole concept. To me, you're betting putting 4 crap players around your table than getting the best players in the world who are in different places and putting them onto a stream, right? Deal with the people who are in front of you. Be real, be human. When I'm talking high value time, I'm talking physical table games, not stream games, right? They are just fundamentally more valuable and higher value time. Okay, actors in plays. So games. Oh yeah, here's a good one. When your game is happening, right? All right, I have students in my games, right? When I know my student is in the middle of finals, I will say, "Hey, we're scheduled to go on Wednesday, okay? I know you have finals. Do you want me to push the game out?" And the person goes, "You know what? Oh my gosh, I'm going through. That is going to be the perfect reset for me. I got 2 before that, on Monday and Tuesday, and then Wednesday's off, and then Thursday and Friday I have 2 more. It'll be the perfect one to get in there, kill a couple of goblins, and I'll be ready for my next, my next finals. It'll be the perfect mental reset. High value time. I'm going to use emotional labor to set my emotions and target setting the emotions of that player. Okay? Thanks. And why am I going to do this? Thanks to the brilliant work of Arlie Hochschild, the sociologist at Berkeley, right? High value time. Okay? Actors in plays, right? So I know some of my players are in local community theater, right? I know that if they're coming, that they often will really like to use our games to try to put on an accent, right? Or run a character that has an accent, or to explore emotions that are going to be used in a character that they're playing for a community play, right? That's high value time, right? They're using the game beyond the game, right? They're using it to create art, to bless the people in their community, right? And then DMing for travelers. I've done this too, right? This is weird, but I got people out who are from the West Coast, right? And I have my games are on YouTube. I have tens of thousands of people that have watched me game master, right? So my wife has friends, and so every now and then I'm requested to game master for people who are traveling in, right, who may have never played before, or who say, oh my gosh, I watched Scott's game, I'm going to be in town, can you put me in one of those awesome games because my GM doesn't GM the way you do, and I'd really like to see it firsthand. That's a high value time, right? I am DMing for somebody that has traveled 3,000 miles here. They haven't traveled for my game, right? But they're taking time out of their travels to give to my game. That is high value time, right? So why should you consider using emotional labor as a dungeon mastering tool? You should use it if you have high value players and if you have games that are happening at high value times. So a huge, big thank you to Arlie Hochschild, the Berkeley professor of sociology, that brought forward emotional labor. This is a really cool tool. I think this is incredibly useful. And I think this is a powerful tool if you meet the criteria I talked about earlier. Be very careful to proceed forward. If you are a newbie, you should definitely not be doing this. You got to deal with a whole bunch of other problems before you get to this level. And then also, if you have mental health issues, do not touch this with a 10-foot pole. If you have significant mental health issues that you have not been able to deal with through therapy or through some other method. A good method, not a bad method, right? So I just wanted to put that last caveat. Thank you guys. I know this was a long video. I want to thank you very much for your patience. And as always, I just so appreciate everyone diving into these more deep topics with me. Let me know what you think about using emotional labor down in the comments. Please consider liking and subscribing. Thank you very much.